All right, let's go over to normalizing INTPs. So what does a normalizing INTP look like?
Normalizing is the opposite of creative. So I know we usually talk about this at the end, but if you reverse the orientation, you get the more normalizing subtype, meaning that the introverted thinking or accuracy function is the more analytic, and the extroverted intuition or exploration is the more holistic. And I mention that because I think it makes sense to understand that the brain wiring is the exact opposite of creative in order to really get the sense that we've gone from one style that looks so bouncy, effervescent, creative, possibly very extroverted appearing, to the normalizing, which is very subdued. It's a lot more of an introverted flavor. So these INTPs are the most aligned with the general population. They have a linear, reflective, and analytic style. So as opposed to bouncing all over the place with creatives, this is a lot more linear, a lot more progressive. They process information one step at a time in a very rational way, staying a particular course. That makes them quiet, observant specialists in the workplace. Unlike the creative type, which usually is a bit of a jack of all trades, this is a more specialized, has stayed with a single, sort of skill they've developed or an expertise they've developed, and they're a lot better at staying on target with that. So they deeply focus in one area. It gives them an extraordinary degree of expertise. Other people might actually find them a little boring because they're so one note. That said, when they are able to discuss the ins and outs of the thing that they've built expertise around, particularly if there's a problem to solve, they light up. And for them, problem solving is both work and play. So they get to do the thing they love to do as long as there's a problem around. They fit well in large conventional organizations. They favor steady positions. They make their jobs interesting. Does that make sense? As opposed to the creative subtype that has trouble finding something interesting, the normalizing subtype makes their job interesting to them. And that's one of the reasons why they don't struggle as much for motivation as the other subtypes.
Now, we're still talking about an INTP here. As normalizing language as you're using, this is still a very quirky, intuitively wired INTP at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. Well, despite the fact that they're more subtle, more patient, in fact, actually, I thought that this was really interesting. Dara says they're not as social. They're actually the least social of the four subtypes. But their humor tends to be understated. He says their words can have multiple subtle meanings that poke fun even at the people they are with, without others hearing it. And this is a kind of stress release. So they might be making fun of the people they're around without other people knowing it, to give themselves a little bit of like venting a little bit about the situation they find themselves in, even if they have allowed themselves to be a little bit more wired in a normalized way.
Fair enough.
Yeah. They usually have a coherent set of tools and methods that, it meets professional standards. It's widely used, but they're going to take these methodologies that are general protocols and they're going to start tweaking them. So they are still INTPs and they just tweak them for incremental gains over time. So that part of themselves that's always looking for leverage, they can't turn it off, even if they're in a normalizing position and have more normalizing wiring. They're such experts that they end up having their mind wired around the thing that they do. So there's a lot of what do I say? Because competence is so important to INTPs, and because they have chosen to specialize in their careers, oftentimes they find themselves, not every single time, obviously, because there's going to be, millions of INTPs around the world, hundreds of millions. So they can't all be the best in the world at whatever it is that they're doing. But they're the ones who find themselves in that position. They're the ones, if they end up becoming the best in the world, it's oftentimes a normalizing INTP who has just completely dedicated themselves to their craft.
It just seems like this is the INTP that really draws a line around their specialty and masters everything inside that circle they drew around that subject matter. And they just know it all. They've gotten proficient about it perfected it.
Yep, exactly. And they're very patient.
Yeah.
So that's another piece of it. Because of that, they also need hobbies, right? Unlike the creative subtype that's always looking for ways to bring their hobbies into their career, the normalizing INTP should be picking up hobbies outside of their career. It's very important for them to do that so they don't become so one note. But when they do that, when they find like a hobby, maybe pick up a guitar or a musical instrument or something outside of it, it's very important for them. It's a massive pressure release. And oftentimes they find themselves in there. So you want me to read the list of
Let's
careers?
talk about the careers, yeah.
Okay, so these are, none of these will be surprising, I'm sure, but these are the non-comprehensive list of careers for the normalizing INTP. Statistician, actuary, architect, mathematician, financial analyst, database administrator, network engineer, civil engineer, cryptographer, industrial engineer, biomedical engineer, quality assurance analyst, materials scientist, geophysicist, and supply chain analyst. So lots of engineers and analyst jobs.
Well, and these are very professionally tracked career paths. So usually most of those are going to require some type of university degree, professional certification or credentialing. Some of them, depending on if you're working for government, you might have government clearances. Like there's a lot of things you have to do in order to be qualified for those positions.
Well, and what I noticed is on the list that you read before of the top, INTP careers, a lot of them were normalizing INTP careers. So I think the normalizing INTP is probably the type that's the most stereotypical.
Yeah.
That said, I would imagine that if an INTP has mistyped themselves here, it might be for like an ISTJ type. Or somebody who might be an INTJ or like mistype themselves as an INTJ, because this is going to lean in on that patience and more of an affectation of judger qualities.
Yeah. Okay.
So I already mentioned the brain wiring, by the way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the chemical neurotransmitter. Is serotonin is the preferred for normalizing subtypes. So dominant it's testosterone, creative it's dopamine, and for normalizing it's serotonin. Let's go a layer deeper. The driver, cognitive function, introverted thinking, accuracy.
As mentioned, that's going to be more analytic. And the co-pilot of extroverted intuition or exploration, that is more holistic.
More holistic. So we're the opposite of creative. Okay.
Exactly.